Okay, time for a virtual hug. I had wanted to mention to you, because it was just brought to my attention here during the service, we've had a couple of congregants test positive for COVID this week. So while the World Health Organization may be accurate that we still have a pandemic, but it's no longer a world emergency, I choose to embrace perfect health, and I hope you do too. But, you know, as the old saying goes, I trust Allah, but I tie my camel to the hitching post. So if you want to choose to continue to wear a mask, I am all for it as well. Okay, guys? Yeah. So what do you do when you are feeling overwhelmed? We have a lot of Bible stories that focus on this. As you can see, talk a little bit about Jonah today. And there are a lot of these themes that resurface in different areas. The belly of the beast. And of course, the first produced Star Wars episode, number 4. You remember they're in the trash compactor, and the trash compactor was coming in. It's another one of those things of like, yeah, sometimes the walls seem to be closing in, but they also can represent some other things. So we've got this Bible. We've got 66 books. 39 of them are in the Hebrew Testament, formerly called the Old Testament, and 27 in the New Testament, or the Christian Testament, as we now call it. These books were pulled together by 2 councils of clergymen. Early Jewish history, in the year 70, the Romans finally got fed up with dealing with these rebellious Jews and flattened the city of Jerusalem, just dispersing Jews in all different directions. So this group of Hebrew theologians came together in the year 90 and thought, okay, which are the books that we want people to look at and to read? Because there are a lot of them out there right now. And then a few hundred years later, in 325, Constantine, the emperor, decided to make Christianity the official religion. So he decided, to bring the bishops together for a summer and have them decide, which of the books should we put in this New Testament, so to speak, or the Christian Testament. So I know Carla and I, when we were in the seminary, they talked about how there are different ways of interpreting the Bible. And the thing is, we have to be willing to admit, yeah, this is the way I'm interpreting it. Any of these can work to some extent. And the first one, of course, that we hear is, literally happened. Challenge with that is that the Bible contradicts itself in many places. In fact, some of the Old Testament books are written as a rebuttal to a previous book. So, and then there's literature, history. There are aspects of it that have been historically proven, others not so much. Then there's the pedagogical. What's the proper way to behave, and what's the proper hygiene? And then, of course, figuratively. Anagogy, spiritual stories or analogy, allegory. Typo, Bob. Okay, yes, symbolism, narrative, and then, of course, moral teachings. Again, how do we behave properly? So we've got this Hebrew Testament, and there are 3 general categories in it. There's the law, there's the prophets, and the writings. So occasionally, we'll see in the Gospels where Jesus says, or people talk about the law and the prophets. They're talking about these groups of writings. And one of those prophets' books, or really it's more like a short story, is the story of Jonah. Now, I printed out, a copy of the thing for you to read at your leisure. It's just long enough that I'd probably bore the hell out of you by reading the whole thing here. So let me give you a quick outline. Briefly, the story is this. Jonah is one of the prophets of Jehovah. Jehovah says to him, go to the city of Nineveh and preach. Tell people that they are acting wickedly and that they need to change their ways, and they only got 40 days to do it, or I'll wipe out that city. Jonah is absolutely sure he does not want to do this. In fact, he decides, bye-bye, I'm going somewhere else. So he boards a ship to Tarshish, another city there in the Mediterranean. Jehovah causes a huge storm to engulf the ship. It's on the verge of sinking. It's discovered that Jonah has defied his God, and it's his fault. He tells them to throw them overboard, explaining it'll appease Jehovah and stop the storm. First, they're like, no, we can't do that. But then they realize they can't get back to shore, so they agree and they throw him overboard. And the storm stops. And Jonah's there in the water, just lamenting, saying, oh, God, take me, man. I wish I could die right now. But instead of that happening, a huge fish comes up behind Jonah and swallows him. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't say whale. It says a great fish prepared by God. And we'll talk a little bit more about the symbolism of that in a minute. In fact, biologists have now discovered that a whale couldn't possibly swallow a human being, but there was that sense of like, well, it has to be a really big fish for this to happen. It's like, well. So, Jonah is in the belly of the whale, the belly of the fish, the great fish. And he prays a prayer of gratitude. It's like, thank you, God. I thought I was going to die. I was so stupid. What I'm going to do is, to follow what it is you want me to do. Here I am, Lord, use me. And I'm going to do better in the future. And so Jonah is in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And the fish takes him back to where he started, spits him out onto the land. And Jehovah once again says, okay, go to Nineveh. And sure enough, he does it. He goes to Nineveh and he preaches and tells people, how they have to end their wicked ways. And he is shocked to discover that they listen to him. And they actually change their ways of doing it. Even the king says, you're right, we've got to change our ways. And so they do this, and the city is saved. And Jonah's looking around feeling frustrated. He leaves the city and goes out onto the edge of the city and saying, God, I really wanted to see these people wiped out. I mean, they're our enemies. They're doing bad things. They should have been punished. And he just kind of sits there and sulks, and God makes this plant grow up and give him shade out there in the desert, outside of Nineveh. And then Jonah falls asleep, and the next morning he gets up, and he's still got the poor attitude. Like the daily word today. It depends upon your attitude when you start out. And God decides, well, I'm going to put a worm into that plant that's giving you shade. The plant will die, and sure enough, the plant dies. And Jonah starts to lament, oh, what happened to my wonderful plant? I can't believe my plant is dying, and I'm baking here in the sun. And Jehovah scolds Jonah. Says, well, isn't it interesting that you're more concerned about the plant than you were about 120,000 people in Nineveh? And then the book ends. So, there are a number of ways we can interpret Bible stories. Some look at Bible as literature. Some look at it as history. There are some historical facts in the Bible, but there are other things that have been proven not to have happened. But for unity, we recognize that whenever there's a narrative story, there's this embedded symbolism in it. And this Metaphysical Bible Dictionary was a 10-year project back in the 1920s to look at every person, every place in the Bible, find out what the symbolism is. So let's take a look at that. All of the characters in the Bible represent some aspect of ourselves. And every place in the Bible represents some aspect of ourselves, some place within us. So the Jehovah, whenever you look at the Old Testament, you see there's this, it'll be the word the Lord, L-O-R-D in capital letters. That's a replacement for the word Jehovah that's in there. Now, Jehovah is our earliest understanding of how God could be. And if you've ever seen the play or the movie Inherit the Wind, at one point they point out, well, we were made in God's image, and human beings decided to return the favor and make God in our image. So suddenly we're dealing with a God that wants revenge and is happy. But then suddenly, Jesus comes along and says, forget all that. God is always good. God's not going to hurt you. And it was a whole new way of looking at God. Now, Jonah represents any time that we're faced with the kind of dilemma he is.
We get the guidance, we know what it is we need to do. And it may be a pain to do it, or we just don't want to do it for some reason, or we have some bigoted idea, and we decide not to do it. And we decide, and like Jonah, he figures he can run away from God. Well, if God is everywhere and everything, including in every cell of our body, that ain't going to happen. But that was his mistake. Especially, like many of you, I came from another tradition. I grew up Catholic. So I discovered unity. Oh, wow, now this stuff all makes sense. And yeah, when I discovered unity in early '87, I'd come to classes and I just wanted to learn as much as I could about unity. And I wanted to apply it in the physical world, and it worked. Most of the time. There are other times, though, where it just doesn't seem to be working. Or there's other times where, you'll get up, you'll be in a good mood, and then all of a sudden, you'll get on your computer and you look at some headlines, or you'll turn on the news and you're like, oh, I can't believe he's doing that. I can't believe she's not doing that. What's wrong with the world? Or some other thing will surface, like someone will tell you that someone's stealing checks from our church. And on Wednesday I come back and I'm well rested, and it's kind of like, what? God, you got to be kidding me. So we get these dilemmas that come into our life like this. There's an inner struggle that happens. It's like, well, I know the truth. Why isn't the truth manifesting in the world? Now I'm going to take the liberty of just jumping to this ending of the story after the city is saved and he's out there in the sun. Jonah has just gone through a very powerful experience, like many of us have at some point in our life. And here he is praying to God, if you just save me, I will change, I will do things much better. But he falls into old ways. And one of those old ways is thinking that if somebody does something wrong, they have to be punished. They have to suffer because they did something wrong. Remember, this was centuries before Jesus taught, love thy enemy and pray for those who persecute you. It stalls our spiritual growth when we get into that kind of a tit-for-tat attitude. We make the mistake of thinking that, well, God isn't handling justice in the physical world. God is handling justice in the physical world. There are things that we do here in the physical world as far as our court system and laws, but in the end, nothing escapes the divine economy. That's why I say I'm confident that, yes, by all means, we'll have the resources that we need, not only for this week, but also for these coming months. So, Jonah, at the very beginning of the book, gets this clear message from God: go to Nineveh. He decides to go to Tarshish. Tarshish is, in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, it says purely intellectual reasoning before it's been spiritualized. Nothing wrong with the intellect, provided it's spiritualized, that it follows spiritual guidance rather than coming up with its own bright ideas. So here he is. He gets the guidance and decides to just go to the intellect and rationalize why he shouldn't do it. Nineveh represents natural animal instincts ready for spiritual instruction. We've all kind of got that kind of negativity within us, but it's kind of like, it's okay. We can change that. There's the recognition of our divine nature and the possibility of vigorous growth. All of those things, that's what Nineveh represents. We're told that it's a city of 120,000 people. Whenever there are these numbers in the Bible, you look at the symbolism of it. 12, the 12 powers, the 12 disciples, the 12 signs of the zodiac. The 12 is the spiritual gifts that are within each of us that just need to be called forward. Now, if you're not familiar with the 12 powers, the 12 disciples represent faith, imagination, will, understanding, zeal, power, love, wisdom, order, strength, renunciation, and life. These are the 12 primary divine ideas, and then they cross-pollinate and generate all of these other divine ideas. You know in your heart, what is good. So the heart of the lesson is the best known, where people say, well, when it was swallowed by this whale. Well, like I said, it's not a whale, it's a fish. Now, there's a storm at sea. We all have our storms. We have turbulence coming up in our life. A lot of times we stir it up ourselves, but suddenly we're reacting to outer negative appearances, and there are a lot of people that do this and think it's just fine. I know when we were up in Kansas City, Carla and I were visiting an old friend, and it just seemed like the whole day we were spending with her, she was complaining the whole day. And not of anything of real consequence, but it's like sometimes we just get caught up in that. Things are not happening according to my preferences. So, we react to these outer appearances rather than saying, okay, God, show me the good in this. Show me the good in this. So it can be national or international events, but generally we're talking about just what's going on within us, our personal, private existence and experience. So, what's the challenge? What's the storm in your life? Where's the storm? Is it in your health? Is it in your finances? Is it in your human relationships? Your career? Your personal growth? Jonah got very discouraged, thought he was going to die, wishing he was dead, thinks he'll drown, but he's not allowed to drown because God always gives us a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance and a fifth chance. God is ready to give us another chance. So we get this great symbol, this fish. Now the interesting thing is, every time there's a fish in the Bible, it's describing an idea that surfaces from our subconscious mind, the ocean. Fish will surface, you'll see it, and then it just disappears. Now usually, though, every place in the Bible, the person is catching the fish. In this case, the fish catches Jonah, swallows Jonah. What's that all about? Well, what it's about is that sometimes when we are feeling so overwhelmed, like Jonah was, a great fish will come to us, a great idea, and we're like, oh God, I can't handle that right now. And that's where we go wrong. We get this great idea and we rationalize not allowing it to happen because we don't feel like we've got the strength or the courage. But you don't have to have the strength and the courage. Sometimes you can say, okay, God, I surrender to this idea. Let it swallow me. Let it incubate me for 3 days and 3 nights. The symbolism of 3 days and 3 nights. The moon disappearing or appearing to disappear in the sky for 3 nights. It just dwindles down to nothing and then suddenly it grows back. So yeah, those 3 days are as long as it takes for you to be ready to move forward with the idea. And then we move forward with the idea. When you or I need help in any of the storms of our life, God makes available to us these divine ideas, the divine download that comes to us. We recognize which ones are right for us, which ones we definitely need to follow through on. They help. The deliverance all comes through these ideas. So don't wait to feel until you're ready. Just be willing to embrace it and let it swallow you. Surrender your troubled and endangered self, your anxiety to divine mind, your attention. Let it just engulf you, engulf us, and move forward. I'm going to have Duncan put up a couple of things you can walk away with just to remember. Lessons from Jonah. Whenever we're in trouble, pray. I did a lot of prayer work this week. And I called Silent Unity, our 24/7 prayer line. It's like, okay, here's the situation. God, show me the good in this. Release your plan. A lot of times we come up with a bright idea, but then suddenly God presents us with a different path we need to walk that day, or that week, or that month. So be willing to release what it is you thought you had to do, when you recognize that there's something more important. Let the divine idea take over. Let it take the lead. Let Spirit take the lead in your life. Follow through on the ideas. What are we being guided to do? What am I being guided not to do? What am I being guided to say? What am I being guided not to say? Something wonderful will happen. The divine idea will use every channel possible to express as our help, our deliverance, and a perfect solution. And the beauty of divine ideas is that they're not complicated. In fact, they're pretty simple. The greater the idea, the more simple it seems to be. Divine ideas like health and prosperity and peace and enough money to pay the bills and have enough to spare and to share. We cross-pollinate those 12 ideas and recognize through our intuition what it is we need to do. Any divine idea comes with it. Everything that we need to have it come to fruition.
Inside the county courthouse in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Judge Lou Oliveira made headlines with an unusual decision.
You may be seated.
A few years ago, Joe Cerna was arrested for drunk driving. As part of his probation, he wasn't allowed to drink. So when he lied about a recent urine test, the judge felt he had no choice.
I gave Joe a night in jail because he had to be held accountable.
It was just one night, but as he entered the cell, Joe says he knew it would be one of the longest nights of his life.
When I walked into the jail cell and they closed the door behind me, I started feeling this anxiety.
It came back.
It came back. A flashback.
Retired Army Sergeant First Class Joe Cerna did 3 tours in Afghanistan and has 2 Purple Hearts to show for it. The Green Beret survived an IED and a suicide bomber. But he says his scariest moment was the night he was riding in a truck with 3 other soldiers.
What happened?
We were following the creek, and the road gave way. And the vehicle went in the creek.
Truck started filling with water?
Yeah. All hope was lost.
Trapped and unable to move, Joe felt the water rising, past his legs, then waist and neck, until finally it stopped at his chin.
How many guys got out of that truck?
Alive?
Yeah.
Just me. I was a sole survivor.
Joe says it still haunts him.
So I suffer from PTSD.
Among his issues,
Then I would drink.
a fear of being in small, cramped places.
I knew what Joe was going through, and I knew Joe's history, and he had to be held accountable, but I just felt I had to go with him. I felt I had to go with him.
And so, a few minutes after Joe was locked up, Judge Lou Oliveira surprised the man he sent to jail by joining him for the entire night.
We ate meatloaf, and we talked about a lot of things.
We talked about our families.
And the walls got further apart?
The walls just got, they didn't exist anymore. He brought me back to North Carolina from being in a truck in Afghanistan. That meant so much to me, sir.
I knew.
This week, Joe promised the judge no more mess-ups.
I don't want to let you down, ever.
It's not how law and order usually works.
Right, sir.
But sometimes jail is not what a man needs. Sometimes the best sentence
Love you. I love you.
is compassion.
Thank you, breathe me.
No, you got it.
Steve Hartman, on the road, in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I'll close with the Bible verse, Jonah, 2nd chapter, first verse. Jonah prayed to Jehovah from the belly of the fish, saying, I called to Jehovah out of my distress, and Jehovah answered me. Out of the belly of hell I cried, and thou didst hear my voice. May you always be open to God, guiding you into grace.